Alright guys, so today on top So I noticed it's been a while since I made a tech tip video, and being that I'm doing some wiring anyway, figured I'd go over some of the basics of a relay. So this is a simple 5-pin relay, nothing too crazy, pretty basic setup. You can use this type of relay basically for anything. You can use it to power a horn, power a fan, power a fuel pump, basically any accessory that the amperage is good for on the relay itself. And there are various variations of this relay. You can get them in solid state relays for stuff that needs really quick reaction time, such as a trans brake, or if you have a stepper motor that's using one of these for some reason. They're pretty handy for that purpose. Most of these relays come with 5 pins. As you can sort of see there. Don't know if you can read the numbers or not on that deal. And they are labeled as shown here. So you start with your pin 30, which is your main power. This will come from your battery. Usually it's fused, or preferably fused, or it'll have a breaker on it already. Then you have your switched 12 volts, which will be your pin 86. This is something like your ignition key or a toggle switch that you have to turn the relay on, so to say. Then you have your pin 87, which is your output 12 volts. So this sends the power to the accessory you're trying to send power to, or a high load accessory like a fan, fuel pump, anything like that. And then 85 in this instance is just your ground. You can wire this multiple ways to be switched either with 12 volts positive or 12 volts negative. Usually the 12 volts negative will be used for horns or maybe like a fan switch, but in this instance I'm using it to where it's 12 volts switched. And then you kind of see off to the corner here, I have it written down that 87A, the center pin, is not used for most. So like we said, pin 87A is not used, and the other 4 are used. So in this instance, just that center pin right there, you just ignore it. And all this is just an electric switch. It uses little power to turn on big power, is the way I've heard it described, and to me that makes the most sense. You're using a low amperage switch power to turn on the main power going through it, instead of trying to use a really high amperage switch to connect a larger power load. So these are nice to have. So the reason I say all that, like I said, trying to get rid of the spaghetti in the car. So that's why I'm making this. This effectively is the same thing, just done with multiple relays. So the way this works is that all these relays are functioning the exact same way. I just gave them all a place to go instead of having just a bunch of loose relays. Like I said on the trans brake video, I sort of scabbed in one of these relays just to have the trans brake working and functional. But realistically what I want to do is this, where I take all the relays that I need, or I think I need, mount them to a board, and give them all their own dedicated fuse powers, dedicated switched panel. All the outputs are on screws instead of just being butt connected together, so they're quickly removable. And this whole panel is modular, so I can take this whole thing out once I unscrew all of my attachments. So in this case, take this cover off. we're having is our pin 30s are all going to this board right here. This will get my main battery power, and this will have a fusible link that I sourced from CE Auto Electric. Fusible link is just a piece of sacrificial wire, whereas if something sees too much load or if something shorts, it burns up this piece of link rather than burning up the piece of wire all along itself. It'll burn this up quicker than the rest of it. That's why they give you a short amount to put closest to where you're tapping into power. So this will be fusible link protected, and then these are all of my pin 30 connections, and they're all fused with 30 amp relays, which is what all these are, 30 amp fuses, and these are all 30 amp relays, so max draw will be 30 amps. These can get changed down depending on how I want to load the circuit after. You can always just go down if you think you're not going to use all of it, just to try and be a little bit more safe about it and sort of tailor it to your specifics. This right here is my pin 87, which is all of my output 12 volts. Still a decent heavy gauge wire, and each wire is going to be individually colored coming off of each relay. This right here on this side, this little, I think this is called a bus board, this would be my 12 volt switched, or my pin 86. It also encapsulates my pin 85, which is my ground. The ground is just coming off of here. I'll give it its own ground, and it's daisy chained across all the relays. You can kind of see this black loop of wire going across all of them. That's just a daisy chain of grounds. This piece right here is a little different, a little more special. This is a 30 amp relay powering this little fuse board. These all have a 30 amp input coming off the relay, and then these will all probably either be 5 or 7 amp draw fuses, mostly for, let's say, gauges. If I wanted to, I'll probably put my lights on this depending on how big the light source is, but this will all mostly be gauges right here, along with any other accessories I want to add to the car. I've been looking at putting a cigarette lighter in and just having that on hand so I can charge phones or, plug in whatever accessory I want to the cigarette lighter. And currently I still have 2 more of these to finish wiring, and then this board will be complete. And then I have to do the hard part, which is rewiring the whole car and connecting it to this, which, it's less than ideal, but it's fine. What you want to do before you start messing with any of that stuff is always look up what size wire gauge you need for the power you're trying to run, along with how to fuse it, fusible link it, or put a breaker in, any of which is better than nothing for the most part, and obviously size them appropriately so that they're actually functioning correctly. If you put an 80 amp fuse on a circuit that's only good for 20 amps, you're going to burn up the wire well before that 80 amp fuse goes, so, always be smart about that. This stuff I actually got from a guy that's local here in Arizona, a place called CE Auto Electric. The guy sells pretty much everything you see on this board. A lot of it I kind of sourced myself from different places, but the wire is where I got all this stuff from, just because no one around here seems to have that many individual colors of wire. It's all usually pretty basic, black, red, and green, and I needed at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different colors of wire, and I didn't want them to share the same color as my positive primary or my ground. That way I can kind of trace and see what circuit goes to what. I labeled each relay individually with a paint marker anyway, so for now it's looking like I'm going to have the starter, the ignition, the fans, my trans brake, lights. This one I'm saving kind of as a reserve, and then this is the accessory panel for this guy. The fuel pumps, you'll notice, are not on this anymore, just because I put one of this same brand. This is actually Leash Electronics. I put one of these 70 amp relay panels in the back of the car to power the fuel pumps. I only run one at a time, and that thing's way overkill anyway, so I just have that so that it just turns on with 12-volt switched ignition. I'll just have to put a fuse on the actual switch side of that switch, or the switch lead going to the back of the car, just to make it safe. But, you know, electronics are a relatively cheap thing to get, and, you know, as long as you're willing to do some thinking and plan some stuff out, you can do it for relatively cheap. I'd say this whole board was probably maybe 80 bucks worth of stuff. One last minute thought that I figured I'd cover is the type of crimpers you use. These are from Harbor Freight. I don't know how much they were, but they work pretty good. You can see where it says, let's see if I can get a good shot, NON and INS. So those two things stand for insulated and non-insulated, and that's the type of terminal that's meant to crimp with that jaw. The non-insulated side has like a little tooth on it that when you put the terminal in, you actually crush the terminal. If you try and do that with an insulated terminal, it'll puncture through the little jacket that's actually insulating it, and it's just, at that point, you're wasting the insulated terminal. There's no point in having that anymore. So, to illustrate this, this is a non-insulated terminal. You can see there's no plastic or anything protecting the terminal from touching another piece of metal. This would be an example of an insulated terminal. This is a heat shrink style terminal, or even a nylon terminal, or even PVC terminal. They come in different insulations, but you'd want to use the side of the crimper that has two flats. You can see one is a little more pronounced and the other side's a little more shallow, just so that when you crimp it, it just crushes the inside but doesn't actually damage the insulation on the outside. Or if you want to get fancy, you would upgrade to these dedicated insulated terminal crimpers that are ratcheting. I got these a long time ago now. I probably had these for like a year or two, and they work great. See the little 3 dots? Red, blue, yellow. Comes in pretty handy. Doesn't get much simpler than that. And there's really no chance of destroying your terminal unless you put it between the dies somehow, which usually won't even let you. So that's a pretty nice piece there. But I do want to point that out because I have seen that a few times, where someone will crimp one of these terminals with the non-insulated terminal side of the crimper and then put it in a spot where it needed to be insulated and then do nothing about it. So I don't do my wiring perfect. I know I don't, because you've seen it, but I try to do it at least well enough to where it's not really that much of a concern. On little stuff like this, you know, you pay an extra $50 or maybe $1 more for these terminals, you know, might as well use them right.